You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Haristadoulou, and it is that time of the week again where we need to make some picks for the UFL. 4 games on slate. We wrapped up last week 3-1, so we're now sitting at a nice and comfortable 500 at 4-4, hoping to maybe bounce again with another 3 or 4 correct predictions and continue on to stay above 500. So I invite you all, comment down below. Let me hear your predictions. Who comes out winners in week number 3 of the UFL? But we will start with the first matchup of the weekend at 1 p.m. on Saturday. You'll catch this on ESPN. We have the DC Defenders traveling to Arlington to take on the Renegades. Renegades are 0-2, DC notching their first win last week. We have the 2 worst defenses in the league in terms of points per game, and honestly in terms of a lot of statistics, going head-to-head in this matchup here. I think if there's a game that you like high points, this will probably be for you. When I look at the Defenders in this game here, the first thing that really came to mind to me is you have an opportunity to try and run the football successfully for the first time this season here. Arlington is the league's worst run defense. They have allowed the most yards per game, most yards per carry, most rushing touchdowns allowed. This is a game where you can firmly establish the run and make things a little bit easier for Jordan Ta'amu, who's had a bit of an up and down year, I would say, to start things off. That being said, you could attribute some of this to being the fact that they played Birmingham in week number 1, and Birmingham is the best rushing attack in the UFL right now by like a literal mile and a half. But they did allow 110 yards and a rushing touchdown last week to St. Louis, so there is definitely a recurring theme there right now where Arlington seems to struggle to stop the football on the ground. I also think defensively, when it comes to this matchup here, you absolutely need to bring the pressure to Luis Perez here. DC's only notched 2 sacks this season, and they really haven't caused a ton of pressure within the pocket here for quarterbacks to this point. And I think when you look at Arlington and the way their strengths are kind of built around in their offense right now, they're 3rd in passing yards per game, 2nd in yards per completion, and also 2nd in completion percentage as a whole. You definitely want to disrupt what Luis Perez does on offense. So I think bringing that pressure and bringing it as often as possible is going to be key to slowing down Arlington's offense. On the Renegade side of things for this one, in my notes here, I literally just in all caps have, if you can tighten up on defense, you have a chance to win. The Renegades' biggest issue right now is just how laid back it almost feels their defense is, where they're just allowing things to happen in front of them. Thankfully, you're going up against an offense where, as I just kind of mentioned earlier, Jordan Ta'amu, up and down season to this point here, a lot of yards, but completion percentage is ugly, sitting at about 53%. DC's also ranked 6th in terms of running the football. So, I mean, there is plenty opportunity for a defense in Arlington that's been struggling to maybe find themselves some success this weekend and notch themselves their first victory. That being said, Arlington, offensively, 3rd in passing yards despite being only 6th in attempts, and they're also averaging 19 points per game to DC 17.5. This game honestly feels like a boon for Arlington to finally get their first win. Your bread and butter, your passing game, is DC's defensive weakness. They're allowing the most passing touchdowns so far this season with 4, 2nd most passing yards, only behind you at 215. If you can tighten up defensively, this feels like a good opportunity for Arlington to come away with a victory, especially at home. And that being said, I am leaning towards Arlington in this one here. I think, like I said, we get a lot of points in this matchup here. I don't expect it to be some sort of defensive standoff. I think both these offenses kind of have their way, and we see that score jump up significantly from what we're like kind of seeing so far as per season total, like per game averages between the two opponents that are going head to head. So I definitely expect a fair amount of scoring here, but I'm gonna take the Arlington Renegades 25-22 as the victors in here, getting their first victory in front of their home crowd. I think it's gonna be an exciting game to watch and a great way to kick off week number 3. Next, we'll focus on the second game on Saturday. We'll have a pretty significant gap on this one here between the first and second game Saturday. This one's going to be at 7 p.m. Eastern time. You can catch this game on Fox here. A heated rivalry getting renewed as things got very testy with the Showboats last season. Of course, we remember the, 42-2 blowout, whatever that final score was, 40-2. I don't know. Showboats lost by a lot. Second game, a little bit closer, just very heated, and especially in that Birmingham and Tennessee heat, it just gets very hot where these two teams play, especially during the time of year that these games are being played, and I think a heated rivalry is a great way to describe this here. Looking at the Stallions, I mean, my only real concern with them right now is just the 2 QB system they have going on here, and I understand why Skip Holtz wants to run the 2 QB system. At the end of the day, spring ball is about giving everyone opportunities, and yes, while championships are nice and everything, that is kind of the baseline of this all. At least that's kind of how it's being painted to be at the very least. We're giving people opportunities, and Skip Holtz himself has even talked about wanting to get both these guys out there, get them some game tape so they can have stuff to show to potential NFL suitors down the road here. But I do overall just need to see some more consistent play from both the quarterbacks here. Currently averaging about 50% completions, and that is the worst in the UFL right now, but averaging a league best 13.2 yards per completion. The quarterback position really just feels like boom or bust right now. It's not getting done in the traditional sense of the word. It's just kind of, it's boom or bust. It really is just boom or bust. You're getting very explosive, massive chunk plays, and that in large part has to do with just how much talent is on this offense in Birmingham here. I would just like to see things not be so boom or bust. I would like to see more consistent play, easy completions being taken, just see the offense get into a far steadier rhythm than what we've seen at certain points for the passing attack in Birmingham. Thankfully, though, for that concern, Birmingham boasts the league's best rushing attack by like a mile. They're averaging 166 yards per game right now. The team that is second behind them is averaging only 86. So they're basically like double what the team in second is behind them. Memphis, though, does boast the league's best run defense. So this is going to be a very fun matchup here and a tough task and tall test for the Birmingham Stallions. They're allowing just a measly 39 yards per game over there in Memphis here. So an interesting matchup to say the least. And for their defense over there in Birmingham, the whole bend don't break mantra that they have going on here, making big plays happen, creating turnovers when they need it most. That's kind of been the MO for this team the last couple of years here, and Memphis has struggled to get into the end zone. They have 3 touchdowns to 6 field goals as far as all of their scoring drives are concerned here, so Birmingham having allowed only 2 touchdowns this season, second best in the UFL, is definitely going to be swaying towards Birmingham's side in this matchup here, and something that Memphis is going to have to consider as they go into here. And switching over to the Showboat side of things, averaging just 2.9 yards per attempt, which is a league worst right now, and the only team who still needs a rushing touchdown. It's going to be tough against Birmingham. They boast the second best run defense in the UFL behind the Memphis Showboats at 53 yards per game. You still have got to try to establish some semblance of a running game. Darius Victor had a better week last week, considering week 1 was an absolute disaster rushing wise. I think the team finished off with 29 yards, 30-something yards on the ground. It wasn't a lot. Very few, and I think Darius Victor finished the day with like a 0.2 yards per carry average, at least last week, averaging about 3.3 yards per carry, so a little bit better. You do need to help keep defenses honest, though. You can't just focus on throwing the football, especially against this Birmingham Stallions team. I understand their run defense is really good, but you could also maybe kind of attribute that to the fact that Birmingham just kind of creates like these atmospheres of things getting out of hand for their opponents, and I feel like their opponents almost feel like they have to throw the football to keep up, and I get that. So maybe that is in large part some of it, but you do got to establish some sort of a run game here. You need to be able to keep defenses honest. I don't think a one-dimensional passing attack coming out of Memphis is going to be enough to take down the Birmingham Stallions the way they're playing right now. On top of that, I think you really need to be aggressive on third down. When I look at Memphis's offense, they are second in the UFL right now in third down conversions, converting nearly 50% of the time at 48%. Birmingham's defense, for all the good that it is doing right now, is 6th in the UFL on third downs here, so you can convert, you can sustain drives and keep drives alive. And honestly, Memphis has been able to do that, as I've mentioned, but you got to turn those drives into touchdowns, not just field goals, going back to the point I made earlier there. And on top of that, you've got to make the big play on defense. And so far, Memphis is averaging 2.5 turnovers per game. They got 5 on the season right now. You have 3 turnovers, I think, by the offense of Birmingham so far this season. So winning the turnover battle is going to be key to try to take down the defending USFL champions. But this is going to be a fun matchup and one that I'm very much looking forward to. Like I said, very heated rivalry, whether they're playing in Memphis, whether they're playing in Birmingham. It's always hot and testy between these two teams here. But I'm going to have to go with the Birmingham Stallions here. As I mentioned last week, I'm going to have a very difficult time picking against these guys. They have just been so good the last 2 years, and they're not really showing too many signs of slowing down. Quarterback situation aside, which did take a little bit of time last season to sort itself out as well before Alex Magoo really took over and lit the world on fire. I don't really have very many worries about this Birmingham Stallions offense. They are littered with talent, and the defense is just like it's somehow just getting better and better every single season, it feels, at this point, with the way that they can just generate turnovers, create pressure, the way they're able to defend dropping back or against the run. Like, it's lunacy how good they are. So I'm going to take the Stallions. I have them winning 23-16. The lack of a run game over in Memphis is really concerning me, especially against this Birmingham team that can beat you through the air and on the ground, and they can stifle what you're doing on offense, especially if they know or feel like they know what you're going to be doing. So I'm going to take Birmingham 23-16. Moving into Sunday's matchups here now, we have ourselves the Houston Roughnecks heading into Michigan to take on the Panthers. Roughnecks still looking for their first win of the season here. Michigan Panthers sitting at 1-1 on the matchups. The Roughnecks, big news from this week, bringing back quarterback Kenji Bahar after releasing him prior to the season. That is something that I am very much looking forward to seeing potentially have happen going down the road, getting to see Bahar drop back and make some throws. He had some really big moments last season for the Houston Gamblers, so I'm very excited to potentially see him come back. And with Guarantano out, it looks like Reed Sinnett is going to be getting the shot at quarterback one again. Offensively, though, passing attack is not really my main concern right now, because we've gotten 2 weeks of pretty solid, I would stress, play from quarterbacks, but the ground game is not great. It's not great at all. You're currently averaging 2.5 yards per attempt, leading the league in attempts at 45 rushes so far this season. That is a recipe for one-dimensional offense and defenses being able to sniff out what you are doing and not really fear what you do on the ground here. So they've got to sort that out, and you need to get it together on third down. They rank second worst in the UFL right now in conversion rate at just 28.6%. Their defense is as good as just about anyone at this point here, and it's a nightmare situation. I hate seeing this sort of thing where defenses are just, they're carrying, and the offense just can't seem to piece it together to give them a good 4 quarters of play and ultimately help them get to the victory, because they're keeping teams from scoring. They're keeping the score low of their opponent, but the offense just can't seem to figure it out. If they can sort it out offensively, this can be a good Roughnecks team. But that's a very big if that I have to stress there about them offensively. On the Panthers side of things, the biggest thing for me really is just them protecting the football here. Currently tied for the league lead in turnovers with 4. EJ Perry needs better protection, because I think that is part of the issue with the 3 interceptions that he has this season. There's a lot of pressure coming his way, and it's putting him in a spot to make some wild decisions. And I think if the internal clock in his head isn't just flying because he feels the pressure coming every single drop back, I think you might get some better decisions from him. So I think protecting EJ Perry is definitely key to the success of this Panthers offense, because if you can do that, again, things slow down for him, and this offense has big play potential. We've kind of seen that now. We saw the big touchdown from Mims last week. You also have a running back in Wes Hills. There is big play ability to be had for this offense here among some other players I didn't mention. I like what they can do. It's just a matter of taking care of the football and also protecting EJ Perry to allow him to get the ball into those playmakers' hands. On defense, though, I think bringing the pressure on third down is going to be key here. Michigan is one of the best defenses on third down this season, and uncertainty around quarterback and an O-line in Houston that's allowed 5 sacks to this point this season could be the opportunity you need to really take advantage and ultimately come away with a fairly easy win at home here. Taking advantage of the mental lapses we also see from Houston game to game here. They're second in penalties right now with 19 on the year. That's almost 10 penalties per game if you're keeping score. So that is definitely something that I think is advantage Michigan in this matchup. But ultimately, for who I think comes out victorious, I look at this game and I see it potentially being a little bit of a lower scoring, very defensive heavy type of game. I do not think it's going to be pretty offensively, unless the floodgates just kind of burst open in Houston and the defense finally collapses because they just can't sustain with the offense continuing to just get off the field in 3 plays or maybe 5 plays at best. that could eventually be something that happens down the road. It might be a little too early for something like that, but you never know. Things happen at a wild rate in football. But I do think this game ultimately ends up being lower scoring of an affair, and I think I like Michigan at home in this matchup here. So I do have my eye on the Panthers for the W here. And like I said, lower scoring affair, I'm looking 17-15. It is not going to be pretty offensively. A lot of defense, I think, is coming in this matchup here. But for those of you that enjoy defense, I think you'll really enjoy this one. And then finally, last but certainly not least, this is going to be a fun one here because it feels like there's kind of a rivalry brewing right now as the St. Louis Battlehawks fans feel like they're kind of being slept on because of them being 1-1 and losing to that 64-yard field goal in week 1. And then you have the San Antonio Brahmas who are 2-0. And I've heard a lot of Battlehawks fans, especially because of the power rankings I put out earlier this week, pointing at the Brahmas and going, you guys barely won this week. You don't deserve to be number 2. But they are 2-0, one of only 2 undefeated teams in the UFL right now, so I do think that is worth something, even if it was a matter of a massive fourth quarter comeback. But that being said, with that brewing, I'm excited that we're getting this game here in week number 3. When I look at the Battlehawks, first thing that comes to mind here is St. Louis's ability to penetrate what has been, if not the best defense, the second best defense in the UFL right now. San Antonio has allowed only 1 touchdown so far this season to 8 total field goals. Half of those field goals coming from the Memphis Showboats in their matchup last week that the defense was able to hold them to as the offense took its time mounting that comeback late in the game. St. Louis has scored the second most touchdowns this season with 5, so I think we're getting a really good matchup here of a defense that is great at keeping teams out of the end zone versus a team that, based off of what they did last season and what we just saw from them last week, could be an offense that finds the end zone at will if they can get the ball rolling. And in order for the Battlehawks to do that, they have to protect A.J. McCarron. San Antonio is the second best team when it comes to getting to the quarterback with 7 sacks on the season. They're only behind Birmingham, who had 7 sacks last season, so that number is ballooned a bit, but they have been a very consistent defensive front, and this stems back to last season as well, being the 3rd best team going after the quarterback last year, and it's kind of just the snowball keeps on rolling downhill, and it's honestly better this year than it was last year. St. Louis's O-line has been leaky. They've allowed 6 sacks so far and a decent amount of pressure. If you watch those games, there is definitely a few situations where A.J. McCarron's getting the ball out, and a play could have very well ended in a sack if he didn't get it out when he does. So there has been some leaky issues on that O-line there. If they can protect A.J. McCarron, though, they have a really good shot at doing kind of what Memphis did last week, but maybe get into the end zone an extra time or 2 as opposed to having to settle for 4 field goals. Defensively, I'm very curious to see how St. Louis looks this week just overall, because we've seen 2 very different versions of the St. Louis Battlehawks defense. We saw a really strong version of it in week number 1 against the Michigan Panthers, and then we saw a game that basically was just defenses out the window against the Arlington Renegades here. So I'll be very curious to see how the defense looks, because I think that also ultimately does kind of have a big deciding factor in how this game is. Do we get week 1's version of St. Louis Battlehawks defense, or do we get week number 2? And then on the Brahmas end of things, they've got to avoid a repeat of last week offensively. Yes, the ending was exciting, especially if you're a Brahmas fan. You know, you're on the edge of your seat. Your team's mounting this amazing comeback. You score the winning drive, or you score and finish off the game-winning drive with about 3 seconds left on the clock here. And St. Louis has forced the second most points, being 43 in the UFL, and has produced the second most yards per game at 302 yards. You cannot fall into that again this week. That cannot happen. Hopefully that was just a blip in, the season, and it's one of those things you can look back on and be like, man, you remember that one game where we were down 20 and or 19 and came back in the fourth quarter? Hopefully that's the case, but with just how much of a force St. Louis's offense is known to be and what they looked like last week against Arlington, granted Arlington's defense not necessarily the best in the league right now, you cannot fall into that situation here, because I don't think you get away with last week's result against St. Louis this week. So definitely something worth keeping in mind here. You also need to win more on 3rd down. For them being 2-0 and being in the position they're in right now, they are the UFL's absolute worst 3rd down offense in the league, barely converting 20% of the time. They're sitting at 21.1% to be exact. That is also not sustainable. Keyword with the offense and the Brahmas in some situations: things that have happened so far this season are not sustainable and need to be improved upon. I'll be curious to see how San Antonio handles St. Louis's rushing attack that kind of came alive last week. Running back Mateo Durant exploding for 104 yards and a touchdown on the ground again against Arlington's defense, which has not looked great this year. Who knows what that is an actual combination of, but it is something that you have to keep in mind. And also San Antonio ranking 5th against the run. Tightening up is a must, because if your run defense starts to leak and things start to open up in the passing game for St. Louis, you might have yourself your first loss of the season. That being said, though, as for who I think comes out victorious in this matchup here, I think we're going to have a really fun contest here. This is going to be one of those tight matchups. I think it's decided under 7 points, one of those tighter affairs, and I think we're going to get a little bit of a XFL rivalry out of this one here. Something tells me it's brewing. I feel like Battlehawks fans feel a little bit slighted by the people buying the Brahmas hype right now. Brahmas fans, obviously defensive. Their team is 2-0, considering where they were last year. They want everyone to believe they've arrived. It almost feels like we're getting a little bit of a rivalry brewing here, and I'm all for it. This is, unexpected rivalries in fun ways. I'm here for it. I'm taking, though, the San Antonio Brahmas. I'm sorry, Battlehawks fans, but I'm buying what the Brahmas are selling, especially that defense. The offense stuff from last week is definitely a concern. It's in the back of my head, but the way Chase Garbers lit it up late, 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, it's clear he can do it. And he's had 2 really good weeks in totality at this point. I would say he's had 5 or 5.5 really strong quarters when things are going the Brahmas offense way. I like what they're doing over there. And again, the shakiness of the defense, we've had one hot, one cold week right now in St. Louis. I think that winds up being the Achilles heel here. I think Brahmas should have a better week offensively compared to how they fared against Memphis, who has a pretty good defense right now. So I like the Brahmas. 22-18, fun contest here. Should be a very enjoyable matchup to cap off week number 3. But those are my picks for the UFL. Week number 3, let me know in the comment section down below who comes out victorious, who's going to be a loser. If you have not already, highly recommend check out my power rankings that I put out, Monday, following the action. We do that every single Monday as well. Highly recommend you do so to see where I have all these teams ranked here, maybe give you a little bit better of an idea as to why I'm picking the way I am. But that is it for me. As always, if you made it to the end, greatly appreciate you. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.